We'll move on to Andrew Bushnell.
Hi, my name's Andrew Bushnell. I'm from the Institute of Public Affairs, where I do the Criminal Justice Project. I'm here to tell you about some exciting ideas about how we can rationalise the criminal justice system to increase community safety. The most important responsibility of government is to keep the community safe. And it does this through the criminal justice system, the law, the police, the judiciary, and corrections. And Australia's criminal justice system is in many ways underperforming. Across the country, there are more crimes being committed and more victims being created than there were 10 years ago. The rate of adult offending has increased by 15% since 2008-9. This, among other things, has led to a dramatic increase in the number of people in Australians' prisons. There are now more than 36,000 people in our prisons. The incarceration rate is higher now than at any point since Federation. And incarceration does not come cheap. We spend $4 billion each year on prisons. It costs $110,000 per prisoner per year. You can send your kids to the most exclusive private school for about half of that. By itself, of course, a rising incarceration rate does not say much. If there are more people committing violent crimes, then more people should be going to prison. Punishment is an essential part of a society based on personal responsibility. And prison is a necessary punishment for people who must be removed from the community for the sake of everyone else's safety. But consider this. The most serious offence of 46% of Australian prisoners was a non-violent offence. This group includes low-level drug offenders, traffic offenders, and petty thieves. And consider further, prison time is strongly correlated with more prison time. 59% of Australian prisoners have been in prison before. In short, sometimes incarceration undermines community safety. And this overuse of incarceration distorts the entire criminal justice system. Resources get put into prisons when they could be going towards stopping crime. Over the past 5 years, the proportion of criminal justice spending that goes towards the police has fallen, while the proportion that goes towards prisons has increased from 22 to 24%. All of this is outlined in the IPA's report from December last year, The Use of Prisons in Australia. For those interested, it's on our website, and I have a handful of copies with me as well. The data presented in that report makes for a pretty strong case for prima facie case for reform. What I want to talk about today is our new report, Criminal Justice Reform Lessons from the United States, which examines some reform directions from places like, I don't know what I've done there, from places like Texas and Georgia. Our work at the IPA on criminal justice has taken inspiration from the efforts of conservatives and libertarians in the United States to rationalise the criminal justice system without compromising the fundamental principles of liberty. As you will see, they've been able to achieve great results without adopting wholesale the criminological approach of seeing crime as a social pathology in which we are all somehow implicated. The story of criminal justice reform has become a signature issue for Republican policymakers in places like Texas, and it typically begins in that state. In a moment that has become folklore for people who work in this area, in 2005, a Conservative named Jerry Madden became chairman of the Texas House Criminal Justice Committee, and he was given an instruction by the Speaker. Don't build new prisons. They cost too much. Madden set out to avoid prison costs by adopting an idea called justice reinvestment. And as originally conceived, the idea was to shift spending from punishment towards health and education in high crime areas. But over time, a more humble, realistic idea has emerged: to impose alternative punishments on non-violent, low-risk offenders and shift money from prison to re-entry services, probation, parole, and drug rehabilitation programs. And this is the first lesson we can take from the United States. At the IPA, we call it punishment reform. We need to narrow the idea of justice reinvestment. It cannot be an attempt to somehow integrate corrections into the welfare state. Instead, we should focus on expanding the range of punishments available. Examples include home detention, community corrections orders, fines, and restitution orders. We can then impose these punishments on suitable offenders in place of prison, getting a similar retributive and deterrent effect while avoiding the costs, both immediate and deferred, of prison. Jerry Madden's other famous line is this: we need to distinguish between the people we are afraid of and those that we are merely mad at. The former group are violent criminals and persistent recidivists, and they need to go to prison. But for the latter group, other punishments may be more appropriate and better overall for community safety. In Texas, they've avoided more than $3 billion in prison costs. At the start of the program, between 2003 and 2010, serious crimes declined almost 13%. They used some of this money to pay for, among other things, 3,000 new places in drug treatment programs and 1,400 beds in intermediate sanctions facilities for punishing technical breaches of probation and parole without kicking people back to prison. By 2015, the proportion of violent offenders in Texas prisons had increased 5.6 percentage points, indicating a clear change in prison demographics and emphasis in the criminal justice system. Other major states like Ohio and Georgia have implemented similar reforms with similar results. In Australia, some states are moving in this direction. Victoria abolished suspended sentences, and South Australia has recently expanded the use of home detention. But the recent commitment by the New South Wales government to spend $3.8 billion on new prisons, a decision that may have been necessary given current trends, indicates the potential for punishment reform here in Australia. Punishment reform will help us reduce the growth in incarceration over the longer term, and it will help at least some offenders break out of the cycle of offending and reoffending. But we already have a lot of people in prison, and the data shows that our prisons are not very good at correcting people's behaviour. It won't surprise anyone in this audience to hear that criminality is largely a matter of individual cost-benefit analysis. Criminals weigh the costs of being caught against the benefits of the crime, and then they choose. In the public debate, we often hear about increasing the costs of crime, especially through increasing the severity of punishments, for example, by imposing longer sentences. But the deterrent effect of increasing sentences goes down as sentences get longer. Whenever you hear a minister touting an increase in punishment for a crime from, say, 15 to 20 years, you should imagine that scene in Spinal Tap where the singer proudly shows off his amp that goes to 11. Studies show that increasing the chances of being caught is a more effective deterrent, which is why we need to stop this shift in spending from police to corrections. What we don't hear much about, though, is decreasing the relative benefits of committing crime. The way to do that is to give people the means and opportunities to make material gains in an honest way. That is, to get a job. Studies show a strong correlation between unemployment and offending. It stands to reason then that while people are in the correction system, they should be being prepared for productive society. Texas and Georgia have made employability central to their reoffending programs. Texas re-entry counsellors provide classes in essential skills like money management, and the state legislature has amended occupational licensing to increase access to the job market. Some Georgia prisons now operate charter schools, and the state no longer asks job applicants whether they have been imprisoned. In Australia, New South Wales is leading a shift in this direction, increasing literacy and numeracy classes, as well as TAFE certification in prisons. Corrective services industries, which employs prisoners, now generates $110 million in revenue annually. We need a nationwide push towards making prison time productive so that it instills the pride and discipline that come from work. And we need to remove barriers to employment, like licensing requirements, and exempt release prisoners from the minimum wage, provide access to the job market and the dignity that comes from being self-reliant. I've spoken about punishment, and I've spoken about what happens after punishment ends. And I want to conclude by flagging the idea that certain people and behaviours should not be punished by the criminal law at all. One study argues that the average American breaks 3 laws per day. At the federal level alone in the United States, there are more than 4,500 criminal provisions, according to the Heritage Foundation. In the United States, reformers call this idea over-criminalisation. The criminal law has burst its banks and is now swamping the rest of the law. Matters that used to be governed by the civil law now carry severe criminal penalties. This is especially true in the finance industry, but is also true for the regulation of everything from transport to the environment. You can be imprisoned for dumping on your own land, or for damaging a protected wetland, or for being in possession of damaged banknotes or coins. Many of these criminal laws exist merely as threats. The agencies responsible for them advertise that they want to work with the regulated people so as to avoid having to impose these penalties. This is an abuse of the criminal law and has some very serious effects. If the state won't enforce a law, it does not believe in that law. If it enforces it only sparingly, then it is acting arbitrarily. This undermines confidence in and respect for the criminal law. For businesses, however, the risk of non-compliance is too great to simply bet on the caprice of government, and so resources are diverted from productive activity to compliance. This cost then gets passed on to consumers. The regulatory criminal law is therefore a form of red tape, and is particularly insidious form because it trades on people's respect for and fear of the criminal law. In conclusion then, Australia's criminal justice system can and should be rationalised. The end goal of the system is the safety of the public. It can achieve this end more efficiently by changing the way we punish non-violent criminals, by improving the operation of our prisons, and by reining in the criminal law. In taking these steps, we'll be following a path laid down by lawmakers and reformers in the United States. Their success can be ours too. Thank you.